everybody. I'm Elizabeth Hudson. I'm Dean of the College of Arts, Media, and Design. It is so exciting to be part of celebrating the concept of design research at CAMD. One of the things as a non-designer that has been so much fun to be part of is really being able to see the range of impact that design research can have and being able to build that up. It's central to the overall mission of CAMD, which is to think about leveraging the impact of all of our disciplines in ways that can make a profound difference in the world and can actually change things and be relevant. Lots of times people want to position colleges like ours and say, oh, you're irrelevant, you're on the side, you don't matter for the future. And I think what we're doing in design is absolutely at the forefront of this, saying absolutely not. These are the fields that need to be centrally involved with the future of how everything works. So thinking about design in an interdisciplinary context and thinking about the work that so many of the faculty are already engaged in thinking of the range of impact and the range of relationships to disciplines, from healthcare to algorithmic justice, to ethical approaches to AI and new technology, to social justice and education. All of these are sort of where some of the most important issues in the world that we're facing today are involved. And it's so clear that design has a profound role to play in all of those fields. So that's exciting. The other thing that's really fun to see is the development of the Center for Design. Having started 2 years ago, and before that, thinking of that as just an idea based on a sort of conviction that this mattered and that we would make it matter somehow. It was quite inchoate. And I remember talking with Paolo Ciuccarelli, who will be coming and speaking to you soon, as the center when we were talking about the position. He's saying, well, design, what part of design? What are you going to do in design? I said, it's all up to you. You can do what you want. It so matters, it's so important. And I think the idea of building something that works in Boston, works internationally, works with Northeastern University, and sort of has such deep relationships in so many different directions. To be able to accomplish all of that within 2 years is actually really incredible. So it's been fantastic to be a sort of partner and facilitator on this journey. But I'm going to, with no further ado, turn things over to Paolo Ciuccarelli as the director for the Center for Design. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you very much. I will unmask me. I think it's allowed nowadays. It's part of the rules. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to be here back in person after 2 years. It's 2 years and some few months since the launch event that we had in a very fancy space in Northeastern University. It was January 28, 2020. And we got a very exciting event over there, but then what happened? We lost a little bit of momentum, I have to say. So we had these wonderful ideas that we discussed, but then, what a perfect moment to make those ideas concrete. But I think it wasn't that bad after all, at least for the plans that we had. Nothing went as planned, but again, it wasn't that bad in some sense. So we had some time to reflect a little bit on what design is and what we wanted to do, as many other people were starting to do. So this initiative about Norman on rethinking design, or this other initiative in Europe that is gathering hundreds of different researchers around this idea of rethinking design. So actually, we joined, I think, a movement that was emerging, and I think it's kind of an attitude for designers to always question, what we do. And we started actually reflecting spontaneously, I would say, gathering people like Nathan Felder, Paul Pangaro, Hugh Dabberley. We created that movement that was really questioning. We had time, and we spent this time reflecting on what design is, and based on 3 pillars that I think we clearly now have at the core of everything we do at the Center for Design. acknowledging the complexity of every challenges out there, acknowledging that design ultimately is always a political matter, and that we constantly need to reform our discipline. So that's something that we realized, I think, thanks also to this time that we had to think about what we were doing. But it wasn't only about thinking. We reacted immediately, and that's a track that we will discuss at the next Design Research Society conference about this idea of rethinking design through meta design. But again, it was not just about thinking. We reacted immediately to the pandemic. March 2020, we decided to embrace the challenge that was emerging by doing something. And that's again, I think it's a kind of, again, of an attitude for design researchers. You think, but you do. We started to gather people around a platform that we built on the web to leverage on design competencies to react, to face especially the unprecedented conditions that people were experiencing. And in a few months, we were able, to really setting up the stage for designers to play their role in fighting away, in a way, these unprecedented conditions. And we gathered, with 12 people that voluntarily joined this initiative as designers. We collected almost 8,000 of responses from people that were really willing to disclose what they were feeling about this new condition. We gathered people from 12 different countries, mostly universities, and 130 designers that helped us building a repository of ideas. 2 of them were developed and they became solutions to that problem. This happened in a month. So while we were thinking about what design is, what design might become, we did something as designers, as design researchers. And everything now will be openly available in open source with open licenses for everyone to build something out of it. We not only started to think theoretically to that, we not only did something as design researchers, but we also started to build tools for this process of constantly reframing, rethinking design. We started the Design Observatory that is looking, I would say, from with a quantitative paradigm to the evolution of the discourse around design. So we got access to the Design Research Society library, and we started to scrape that corpus of text to understand how in 30 years the discourse around design has changed. But again, it's not just theory. We also started to collect the practice of design in spaces where nobody was collecting those examples. So we started a data sonification archive because we wanted to go there with our research. So we collected more than 400 examples of people doing actual data sonification projects as a basis of knowledge that we can leverage as designers. And then again, we started to collect, there has been an incredible production of data visualizations around COVID-19. And I think what's most important for designers, for researchers in design, that observing what other designers are doing. And so we created this COVID collection. Now we have 12,000 examples of designers that embraced the challenge of using data to represent, through media, through scientific publication, these incredibly complex problems that we were facing. So that's something that happened nothing of that was planned. This happened, I would say, because we had this time that we didn't expect to have. But as designers, that's what we do. So we use that time to reflect and do something and reflect on what we do again. So that's something that happened in these 2 years that we had to reschedule, replan completely. Also, something else happened. Every faculty of we have 8 core faculty members in the Center for Design, and each of them, engaged in different projects. And so, if you come to the center, you see all the different projects for all the core faculty members: Christian Klöckel, Pedro Cruz, Dietmar Offenhuber, and Angeli, that will moderate the panel after. Each of them, they have their own research agenda. But I think one of the most important mission for the center is to create something across all these different research lines that they are cultivating individually or with their own research groups. We have new labs. We have the experience design lab from Christian Coco. We will have very soon, I see Mizo Kim here, a health and design lab. So we are developing all these kind of new ways of gathering researchers, but across them, I think we have to keep continuing doing what we did in these 2 years, like observing design and its evolution across all these different research lines, creating tools for designers, creating the conditions for other people to design. That's, I think, now I have this clear picture. That's, I think, the mission of the Center for Design. Whatever is the research line that we incubate. We had a new faculty joining, like Casper Hartweld, with all this, the work he's doing in game design, but it's another additional, I would say, vertical research line direction, but each of this research line has to be served by this, the mission of the center. So I just want to spend some time to thank the 3 person that we hired to help run the center, Estefania, Sarah, and Nicole, with different roles they helped. And some of the other projects, so we really moved in very different spaces, from the role of interfaces for fighting misinformation, working with HR data to represent personal data in a better way, survey design metrics to try to measure the impact of survey design, bridging AR, VR, XR, and education in design with one of the fellowship of the Center for Design, embodying information, dancing data. All these projects, I think, happens in an environment that we're trying to shape with this idea that I presented at the beginning. These are some of the partners we were able to gather around some of this idea. And I think one very important format that we developed is this idea of the conversations. Every month we launch, or we imagine, or we design, or we build a new bridge with other disciplines through design. So we leverage what is, I think, an essential component of the nature of design. Design is inherently interdisciplinary, and so we leverage on that to bridge with other disciplines. Every conversation, in a way, is cultivating a different direction. So, to conclude my quick intervention, when we saw outside here this design week happening, actually 2 design weeks happening at the same time outside, and I think it was a few months ago, and then we realized, okay, there is a lot of design on those programs, but where is the research in those programs? We couldn't find anything that was really reflecting these ideas of design research that we had. And so we decided to complement that with our own design week, a design research week. It's a new format, it's a pilot, I admit. It's something that, again, we didn't plan years ago. It's something that we came up as a reaction, again, as we did with Design for Emergency. We reacted to something that we saw, okay, we saw a gap, and we wanted to fill that gap with something meaningful. We had to rush, but we made it. Thanks everyone that participated to this wonderful week. Has been really intense, I have to say. But we are here, and we have a space that has been renovated during the summer. And finally, after 2 years, we saw that space alive. That was probably the most rewarding aspect of that week. People coming together, gathering, most of the time, beyond the schedule, discussing and talking about essential, fundamental aspects. What is design research? What is the role of research methods and all of that? And we also have a new PhD program, and it was a fantastic, I think, combination of factors that really created an exciting moment. Really something that goes beyond what I can convey nowadays. Just to conclude, a picture and then a quote. The picture is from what I think is the most effective piece of the Design Research Week. Is that very simple. It's part of a MFA thesis, I think. It's a glass window with 2 prompts. What do you like about Boston and what do you hate about Boston? At the beginning it was, 2-3 days, it was empty. But as soon as someone wrote something, it was like a snowball effect, and immediately became a place where people were gathering to read and laugh and and think about Boston and comment about that. So it's incredible, when you put something there. And I think it speaks about also the value of this physical space that we have right at the entrance of Ryder. There is a lot of potential, I think, in that, and we certainly have to build on that. A picture and a quote. After all these reflections, I still think that probably the best way to define design, if we want to do that, actually, I think that defining design is more a process than a sentence. And that's why the Design Observatory, for example, we have to work constantly on that. But if I have to pick one, I think this might be the more meaningful. Also thinking about who will come after me on the stage, Ezio Manzini and the panel after him, this relationship between design, action, and change, and everyone, I think is crucial nowadays if we want to think about design research. That's all from my side, and next is Teresa Franqueira. She's connected online, so we'll zoom in Teresa, and she's the coordinator of the DESIS network. The International DESIS Network is a network of labs, she will explain that, and is an introduction to the keynote from Ezio Manzini.
Thank you, Paolo. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, already good night in Europe, where I am. I would like to congratulate Design Research Week and the Center for Design for organizing this event. And I also would like to thank Paolo Ciuccarelli the invitation to introduce Ezio Manzini's keynote. I'm here, as Paolo said, as the international coordinator of the DESIS network. And I will briefly introduce DESIS for those who don't know it yet. DESIS stands for Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability, and is a network of design-led research labs based in universities around the world, created to trigger and support social change towards sustainability. We use design thinking and design knowledge to co-create with local, regional, and global partners socially relevant scenario solutions and communication programs. The network was created in 2009 by Ezio Manzini and was connected to the wave of social innovation that characterized that period. Innovations emerging mainly from grassroots initiatives aiming to solve in a collaborative way problems that people had to face in mature industrial societies. Today, the network has 60 labs in design schools in the 5 continents and continues to grow. In the past decade, 3 themes have gradually emerged in design community at large and internally within the DESIS network. One was the recognition of social, cultural, and biological diversity as vital resources to nurture and protect all living species and environments. The other one was the interdependencies between natural systems and our own lives. And the third one was the importance of the commons for the well-being of all communities as a starting point for designing. And these themes guide the work of the DESIS labs, fostering and supporting this new wave of eco-social innovations. DESIS network is working to collaboratively build platforms for teaching and research and to guide and strengthen the transition towards a more resilient, diverse, and non-anthropocentric sustainable world. One of the network goals is to commit to a politics of design based on care and solidarity in order to advance equity, inclusion, and social justice goals. We plan to continue to do so through the courses we teach, the research topics we take, and the projects we create. The DESIS labs are very active and they are practice-based. They are using participatory and co-design methodologies and have a meaningful impact on the communities they are part of. Each of them has its own program and their own activities. And we have been learning a lot with each other, namely with the initiative of the DESIS Café, where DESIS Lab can be the host and share their projects and difficulties with the rest of the network. It is quite important to have a more global and diverse vision on how to act together for a common goal on sustainability, and to nurture a dialogue between diverse cultures and stakeholders. For instance, the DESIS labs in some countries, South America, United States, Canada, China, South Korea, Ghana, just to name a few, have been exchanging best practices that we might consider useful when tackling some specific problems. Our desire is to produce knowledge with the contribution of different partners in an open process, and that can be used by all stakeholders with open results. One of the DESIS initiatives, that is the Conversations for the Planet, is a tool to build and share knowledge through debates and reflections about ongoing or prospective social initiatives for the planet. The concept is based on one or two keynote speakers discussing the issue of environmental and social sustainability, fostering reflection and launching new challenges to our DESIS labs. Our first conversation for the planet took place last September under the topic of social innovation and the post-catastrophic condition as part of the new normality. We will share details soon about the next one in case you want to join us. And now, not to take too much time, as you will present the topic of livable proximity and the role of social innovation in creating connectedness between individuals and between people and the planet. Thank you very much for your attention. I think we are all eager to hear your thoughts on livable proximity. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks to Professor Hudson and to all the institutions that permit me to fly over the ocean after 2 years. That was a long period, and this is more than twice, two and a half. And this is the first long fly that I do. After I was in America also, the last fly was in the February 2020, and I was in New York, and I had to escape, followed by the virus. In any case, I don't want to now to tell the story, but it was only to say that beyond the pleasure to be here, beyond the pleasure to be together, there is also the pleasure to something that restart. And I think that I have also to refrain to interact with what has been said by Paolo. That was very stimulating, but probably this will be a different conference from the one that I have prepared today. So I will remain on what I wanted to talk you about. And in some way, just to make a bridge between in my view, at least very interesting presentation of what could be design, the research, design research, that all the discussion has been mainly on the how, what is the design research, how it works. But I think, I'm sure that I'm not the only one, that to discuss about design and design research even more is also the what we do, not only how we do. So what are the topics that we want to discuss? And I think that a big part of the design research is to define the topics that have to be researched. And the topic that to be researched means not only something that is important, because it's obvious, at least for us, we have to work for sustainability, transition, resilience, equity, etc. But the real difficulties is to transform this very general objective goal toward something that is manageable at the scale of what we as designers, not alone, with others, we can do. So one of the aspects of what a design research center should do, in my view, is to better define some topics that at the same time are relevant and are manageable in the sense that we can do it as a designer with our tools, with our sensitivity, with our creativity that is sometimes forgot that we have to be also very creative, with our sensitivity toward what should be beautiful. That is also something that we should be able to do, but to do what at the end of the story? And this presentation is, well, I dare to share with you some point that has been the result of some reflection that comes, it has been presented, all the story of DESIS and the design for social innovation that with many friends we started 15 years ago now, so the topics progressively changed. And so this is not, I will not pretend that what I'm saying now is the topic, are the topics of the DESIS lab, but in any case, I am a member of the DESIS lab, so this is my contribution in terms of topic, and the title is that one that I'm not going to explain now, because I hope that in the remaining, I have to look to him, because he told me that I have mandatory to be in half an hour, so I want to be in a half an hour, and so in the remaining 20 minutes, I will try to explain what it is and why I think that it is important. But I commit myself in the last 2 months not to start anything without this. It's possible to have a little bit darker.
I'll try.
In any case, if you see it's not, in any case, I don't know here. I have the impression that here, the fact that there is a terrible war, that this war is terrible as all the wars, but with something more, because it's a war that with the risk of the nuclear catastrophe. I don't know if here is so present as it is in Europe. For sure, if it is present or not, I dare to say you should be very concerned. We should be very concerned. And we should be very concerned about the war in general, about the position that we have to take. For me, well, maybe not so much. Otherwise, everybody is going to sleep. But something in the middle, no? So all the war are terrible. This is particularly risky. And in my view, there is no one that can win. We cannot use terminology as we want to win or somebody has to win. The only enemy is the war itself. So this is my position, and I want to tell it because I think that it's impossible for me, for my state of the spirit, and not afterward I will go back to where I want. But this is probably the most important thing that I have to say in this moment. And me, as very modestly as many others, we are trying to imagine what does it mean not only to say, okay, we are against the war, we are for the peace, but what does it mean to be peacemaker, to participate as a peacemaker, somebody that promotes a culture and a practice of peace. And in particular, at least in Europe, for sure, I suspect also here, to break a kind of black and white polarity, because or you are here, or you are for one, or you are for the other ones, and we have to find a way to find the path to be capable to say that there is something else. And we, as designers, we are human beings, so as human beings, we have to stand up and to voice on this point very strongly, the most strongly that we can. But at the same time, we are also designers, and so we have to challenge ourselves and to see if and how we can use our creativity to promote a culture and the practice of peace. For instance, the Polytechnical, that is my original school, has started a call without knowing exactly what we can do, but they dare to start a call, that one, it's called Design Against War, to see if the brilliant mind, the young mind that we have around us, but not only the Polytechnical, is open to everybody, also to you, if you want, to give ideas of what could be to operate as designer facing this terrible situation. For what regards myself, I am struggling to imagine, and I try to do my best. Now I have to talk about my book, because this topic is also the presentation of my last book that has been in English a few months, 3 months ago. And of course, when I wrote the book, as I think everybody of you, I was thinking about the COVID, I was thinking about another big catastrophe. In some way, the book is also related, at least the original motivation of the book has been also related to the fact that we were facing that kind of catastrophe and not imagine a war like this one. But afterward, I asked myself if I talk you about proximity, whatever it will be the meaning, it has something to do with the war. And I think not because I was so strategic, but because, as a matter of fact, let's put it in very simple. If you had to kill somebody else, you have to take the distance. Maybe it's not the physical distance, because you can be also very near, very close, but to have the possibility to trigger and to kill somebody, you have to create a wall of distance. And therefore, in some way, we can say, in the very normal meaning of proximity, that is physical but also a relational proximity, to make war, you have to create distance. To say they are terrible, they are awful, they are the devil, they are the beasts. And the other says the same thing. And this creates the distance. So in some way, not because I foreseen it, but it happens, that we can state maybe that proximity and the search for proximity could be also something that is not the solution of the problem, of course, but a part of a contribution at the culture that is a culture of peace, that our interconnected society, armed with the nuclear power, should have not only as an ethical position, but as a very pragmatical position, because we cannot put at risk the overall planet, because we start to enter in this kind of spiral that is the worst and worst. So this, it took me a little bit of time, Paolo, but yeah, this is, oh, thank you. Okay, no. In any case, thank you. In some way, I would like to touch you a little bit. I would like to feel not only from you, but from all the population to stand up, because for me, it's inconceivable that something like this is happening and everybody's quiet, looking to the TV and listening. Oh, maybe we use a tactical nuclear power. Tactical? Tactical bomb, tactical nuclear bomb. It's atom. It was a taboo. It was impossible to talk about this kind of weapons. And now they say, oh yes, maybe they will use it, and so we have to imagine something to do. Okay. Now let's go where I wanted. To talk about the distance, to talk about proximity, that is my topic, I have to start from the opposite of proximity, that is distance. And once upon a day, the proximity was normal. There was no need to talk about proximity, because before the communication, before the telephone, before the cars, before the mass transportation, the society to work has to be in proximity. You had to be in face to another one to exchange. Maybe you can travel a little bit, but mainly everything has to be close. So it was obvious. The society was done by a group of people that had to be close. In some way, modernity is such a complex phenomenon, we can read it in so many ways. And this 1 century has been interpreted in so many ways. So my little one is, we can read modernity as an attempt to make possible for people to live and to make what is your life without being in proximity with the others. Because you can have different functions of your life spread in the territory, and utilize the car, the mass transportation, the telephone, now the internet, to connect. And therefore it becomes possible to be spread and connected, and therefore in some way, in distance, you can organize your daily life, your work, whatever is part of your living. And you can say, and so what? Maybe it's people like it. Maybe this gives a kind of freedom. Maybe by a certain point of view, there was a search for efficiency, because doing for the architect, the planner, the zoning, the creating places that are monofunctional could be much more effective, apparently. But after 1 century of searching for this kind of reorganization of the society from the traditional society of proximity toward the society of distance, we discovered that all those apparent efficiency were inefficient at a very global level. And now we are if you want, when we talk about proximity, the first thing that normally people think, and I will come back on this, is about the mobility that is needed. The mobility means traffic, the traffic means pollution, the pollution means CO2, the CO2 means all these, every kind of environmental problems. And this is obvious that if we have to move around to reconnect our life in functions that are very distant one to the other ones, this could be problematic and became problematic. But in the last period, we discovered that this way of reorganizing society in distance has an implication that is the social scales that collaborate to melt the social fabric, to melt the social forms. And at the end of the day, in many places, especially in the city, I don't know, I suspect also in the States, but for sure, in the place that I know better, that is a little bit Europe and a little bit China, people is alone. So loneliness is considered one of the real problem of the society. And it's a problem not only because it's very difficult to manage a society done by individuals, but also because the people, we are social people. We have to live with the others. So loneliness is a social disease. At a certain point in the UK, they also organized as part of the ministry, there was a ministry against loneliness because it was such a grave issue. Therefore, there are good environmental and social motivation to say maybe for me, for sure, we have to break this tendency toward distancing people, and to give as objective they want to regenerate some form of proximity. Of course, when I talk about proximity, somebody can say, okay, you want to go back to the past, a kind of ideal vision of the past where everybody was a kind of community, having a good relationship one with the other one. By the way, it was not really true, but in some way, there was a kind of proximity. Well, it's not like that, because in any case, to the past, it's impossible to go back. And therefore, as we talk about hybrid space for practically everything that we can deal with, also the proximity that we will have to invent today has to keep in account that at the same time the people is hyper-connected. And so all the story, in my view, is how to use the digital component of the space in which we are, not to separate more and more, but to help people to reconnect. So yes, we have to use the technology, but there are two, now it's simplified, but two main roads. One is to use the technology to be more and more distance, or to use the technology also to be more connected to the place, more capable to care one for the other one, to be more capable to care for the physical environment in which you are. Personally, I think that there will be no culture and practice after the culture of sustainability without reducing the distance in between the people and the capability to take care of each other. And care asks for physical presence. As has been written so well by Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, care is a tactical story. So you have to touch people. And therefore, you cannot have care if you don't have people touching each other. Afterward, you can also telephone, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, the core of caring is touching, is being physically. And this is true in the relationship with the people, in between the people, but it's also true for the environment. So I am convinced that our careless attitude toward the environment is because we have been detached. And so we had to refine a way to be more near, more close, also not only with the agent of the system, but to quote Bruno Latour, with the actant, so the non-living entity that are in our system. To do that, we have to think about proximity and what that it means, proximity. And of course, it's a term that I like it also because it's a very normal term. In all the language that I know, it has more or less the same meaning, and it's related to be in some way close. And it has two main interpretation. One is can be called the operational proximity. That means the fact that the people being nearby can do something together. So how we can organize our practical life having this kind of proximity, being close in the space. But as I already said, there is also the relational proximity. That means how we can create conditions in which the people have more probability to be one in the front of the other one, being open, feeling empathy, feeling a kind of attention for the other. And at the end of the day, I summarize this, the openness, this attention, this empathy as care. That in my view is one of the key words for every possible vision about a sustainable future, has to be a future in which people care. And this notion of proximity for me is so powerful because in between the technical, functional, operational part and the relational part, there is a double link. And this is what I hope to have the time to explain better later, but we can, to anticipate in the case that I don't arrive to the end, because I die now, no, because the time finish, nobody can really design the relational part. The relational part happens, emerge. But we can do something on the operational part, creating some condition on the operational part of this proximity that make more possible and probable than the relational thing happens. I hope that I will explain it later. A final point before entering maybe in something that is a more example and more concrete. No, also this one is more concrete, but in any case with some example, I had to introduce this notion of a proximity system. So we know, and we know more and more, that we live in complexity, as Paolo recalled us, and I totally agree. So if we have to have one name to say what is changed in our culture until now is to face complexity, to recognize the complexity existed also before. The only thing that we tried to not to see it. Now we are obliged to see complexity. So complexity. So everything is linked to whatever else, but to operate, we have to, in some way, yesterday I used the term with somebody, to cut a subsystem that is the one that for some reason is interesting for us. And we can cut the subsystem in many different ways depending on what we want to do. And now I'm proposing to cut the subsystem that is the proximity system. So it's the system of all the entities that are in relationship with us. Afterward, of course, we are not isolated. So this proximity system, in turn, is part of a larger system. But it's interesting for me to focus on the system of proximity and in some way to characterize it. Because this system of proximity could be evaluated in terms of density of links. So you can have a situation in which there is a very high number of interactions that happens. So it could be high or could be low. And most importantly for us is diversity of the links. So you can live in a condition where you have interaction, but only in a certain way, as it happened in the zoning. So you are in a certain proximity system where we have interaction also only with residents as you. You can be in the workplace where you have only interaction for working. You can be in a shopping center, you have only interaction as a market, and so on and so forth. Or you can rebuild a proximity system that is dense enough on one side, but also diversified enough. Because when it's dense enough and diversified enough, what does it mean? It means that you can spend have the opportunity to find a lot of what you need in your life, in your proximity system. So that proximity, if it is desertified, you do not find around you what you need. If you are in a rich ecosystem, very diversified ecosystem, you can, if you want, you are not obliged. There are not walls around, of course. But you have the possibility to find around you what you need. And what you need functionally, but also what you need in terms of human being that has the will and the need to be in a relationship with the other. And this is what is, in my view, the meaning of livable proximity. So to recreate, what does it mean to create a proximity that have the possibility to be a livable proximity in which you can find what you search. And this, written in a little bit more expensive, extended way, is what you can read here. So a system in which you can find nearby where you are the majority of things that you need in your life, both for work and for entertainment, and for caring system and whatever, but also the place in which you can have more probability to start conversation, to start to interact with the other, and to maybe start to build some form of community, maybe to find some project to do together. And I say maybe because it's not mechanically given. It's not that because you create this environment, people will be happy to start a conversation. But it's given the vice versa. So if you do not have a condition in which you met other people, you don't have the possibility to start this kind of conversation. Therefore, it's not something that is mandatory obliging people to have a good relationship with the others, but it creates conditions. We could say for the designer, it creates some affordance that make conversation and what will come after the conversation possible and probable. This vision could be a scenario or it's only a vision. Now, I don't have the time, but I imagine that you know the difference. One thing is a vision that could be totally, yes, a good idea that somebody, in this case Mr. Manzini, tell a story, oh, what a beautiful world, like this. But unfortunately, it cannot happen. So this is a vision that could be part of our culture, but it's not immediately something that can orient our action, because we don't know what to do if it is only a vision. A scenario, and it's what I call a design-orienting scenario, that is what was in the title, is a vision that has some possibility to be implemented if something is done. So it's not said that it will happen. Very often it will not happen if you don't do anything. But it's not impossible to imagine what to do. So you have to find the leverage that permit to these ideas to become true. And this make possible for the designer to have some idea, to cut, as I said at the beginning, in the reality, some element, to know that you have to go in a certain direction, to have some guideline that permit in the complexity. I will not say to find the right way, to find the way that in that moment, in that context, you think, you take your responsibility to say that this is the right way. A designer have to do it. If you don't do it, you simply move in an inertial way. So if you are a designer, this kind of choice is a moral choice that every design do when you do, as a designer, a choice. And so how you can have a direction in the complexity, you need some scenario, you need some vision, you need to know where you can find the elements that are needed to move in this direction. So we have to answer to the question, is it viable? A scenario is a vision that in some condition could be viable. And I repeat, it's not said that it's the main trend. It's not foreseen this is what will happen, because it could be in the contra trend in relation to the main trends. But you have to find into the society something that say, look, but moving from here, maybe you can do something. And it's your responsibility, if you want, to choose, to bet on this possibility, even though the possibility maybe is something that to fight with strongest scenario. In this moment, this one is not the only scenario, because we have the big scenario, the continuity of the society of the distance, maybe with some smart thing inside to say, don't worry, go on as it is now, but we put some technology inside and we solve all the problems that we've seen before. Or the other one that is discussable, but for me is very worrying, that is what I call the scenario everything from home at home and from home, in which it's a kind of super proximity. Everything happens in your home. You don't have any society anymore. You don't have any city anymore. You have people in their own little boxes, and from these little boxes, there are some slaves or some robots that brings you what you need to eat. For the other biological caring necessity, and for the rest, you are living in a box. Your body, you are the body before being your mind or your imagination. So the you that is your body is living in that box. Okay, we could discuss, maybe we'll discuss later. I had to say something in 7 minutes. There are 3 main leverage for me. One is what we call social innovation. One is that there is some institutional innovations, if you want. So there are some institutions that are beginning in the complexity and the contradiction that we have, but we can recognize some trend or sub-trend that goes in the direction of rebuilding proximity. And there is what we as expert designers, so before Paolo said, everybody design. For me, I wrote a book, advertisement, Design When Everybody Designs. It was exactly on the fact that everybody designed. But when we say that everybody design, comes another question. So me, you, we are designers. So what we do as designer? So one thing is that everybody design, and we have to recognize it. But afterward, we have to extract what is specific, our action. So we that are expert in design. So I think that we can do something. So we have these 3 leverage. Understand the social innovation, understand and recognize and support the institutions when they do something good, and be more clear and develop through our research, our concept and our tools to help this process. So 2 minutes each. The social innovation, I hope that you know what it is, but to make it short, in the last 15 years, from the beginning of the century, let's say, in the many ways in which society can change, social innovation can happen in many different ways, for some reason, somebody started to recognize a kind of change that has some peculiar characteristics. And we have observed group of people that try to live in a collaborative way, that try to organize the food system in a different way, that try to organize the kids or the elderly in a certain way, or to care in a collaborative care, the work, the Fab Lab also in some way to take care of your microenvironment. So practically at 360 degrees of our everyday life, we have seen 15 years ago kind of bubble emerging of group of people that started to do something that was not what the mainstream was saying. They was talking about individual, consumerist, etc., and those people were collective, doing things together, in some way activating themselves to solve some problems. So very diverse ideas, very diverse solutions, and what they had in common. The main thing that we observed from the beginning was instead of being individual in competition, they were people in collaboration. So this has been all the discussion on social innovation for 10 years about how they collaborate and how it was possible to have this collaboration. Afterward, progressively, we understood that they were in a moment in which there was the mainstream saying the place do not exist, there are only flow, there is nothing. So it's the no places have been written books about this. They were related to a place. They were communities, but also living, using some digital devices, etc., but bringing their own interest to a place. So a community built around places. And now I will add a third level, that they have reintroduced the notion of proximity. So they were capable to do what they did because there was real people facing one to the other one and doing something together in this way. And this is why, for me, this can be seen as the building block of this scenario of proximity. So nor me and not me and nor the other that I will mention now could have talked in this concrete way about the possibility of scenario of proximity if we did not had 20 years of experience of this kind of boiling pot of ideas. What is interesting is that 15, 20 years later, we have not only these little initiatives. At the beginning, my group, somebody in my group, Anna Meroni, but it was work of our group, wrote creative communities, and was the initial way of looking to these things. So a constellation of many little things. Now we have still the constellation, but we start to see an overall picture. And we start to see the overall picture also because some institutions started to recognize that this kind of energy that was emerging from the society could be very interesting and very useful. I could use as an example all the issue about care, for instance, and in Europe, people, and also the European community is talking about community welfare. So if one thing is that we have a group of people that take care of each other, it's very nice and very small. But another thing is we talk about that there are a line of investment and interest that talk about what does it mean in welfare, that rediscover the fact that the people are not only individual patients, but are also people capable to have their capabilities, and in the capability, they have also the capability to do something together with the others. And this is very important. Here I had as an example a classical, because my book is a little bit focused on cities, and maybe we can continue with the discussion on this in the panel. But we have cities. I took Paris because it's probably the most well-known in terms of communication. But I could quote Milano very well. I could quote Barcelona, where I worked very well. I could quote Copenhagen. I could quote many others, in which what happened? It happened that somebody started to say, look, there have been so many different experiences, but we can start to, I use a term that I don't know how it sounds in English, institutionalize them a little bit. So to give them a frame in which they are not only some heroes that make something interesting, but we start to give some borders, some element that permit to really spread it to the whole city. And there are things related to safety and sanitation. There are the schools that become places for organizing not only the kids, but many other things. There are some places that are kind of concierge for the neighborhoods, to rediscuss what is the role of the proximity shops that are so important in maintaining the dynamism of the proximity system, to create a new, in any case, so many different, and all of them, what they have in common? They have in common to generate some spaces that are multiple, for multiple use, in some way, to break the monofunctional idea of the city that has been the modernistic city, where every function is separated from the other ones in the space, but have the possibility to recompose and to create spaces that are more multiple. The third is what design can do for this. And I will finish with this image, if you want. Of course, for what I said, using my language, we should design for the relational, let's say, for the functional, the operational side. That means how we localize the service, how we take services, as we have seen in the case of Paris. Some services are very centralized, and how we spread it in the territory. So this is a huge program of redesign of the overall system of the services. And not only the service, we can also redesign the system of production, because we can have production and the offices that are localized in the space. But afterwards, this has to be also the proximity of the relational proximity, and there is this issue that it's difficult to imagine what we can do to promote this relational proximity. I already anticipate before, there is a link in between what you can do functionally and what you can do, or what can happen at the level of relationship. So I like maybe to finish with this image. So what you see there are people apparently happy, and they have relationships, and nobody can really say what they are talking about. But they have some possibility to start conversation because they are dancing. And they are dancing because there is a place that permits to dance, and because there is the music, and because they know how to dance. So the three elements. So we cannot design anything on what they are talking about, luckily, but we can create spaces, in general, infrastructure, that are positively creating conditions in which these interactions can happen, and this is totally to be designed. We can, if I start to dance, you need a trigger for the conversation, and the trigger for the conversation in the case of dance is the music. So it's not only to create infrastructure, but we as a designer, but not only we, have to in some way feed the conversation, brings idea, generate something. This is art, it's design, it's many other activities that can be the trigger of conversation, the one that make people dream, and dreaming they can start to discuss. So it's not only the technicality of creating the environment, it's also how to trigger. And finally, and this is probably the less visible, if you have the place and if you have the music, but you are not capable to dance, it's not that if I don't know the Professor Hudson here, and I can go to ask if she wants to dance, but we both are not capable, we don't know each other, but we both are not capable to dance, we cannot do it. So there is an implicit in that image, that the people have they do not know each other, but they have something common. They know how to dance. And this means that to collaborate is a capability, it's a technicality. This fantastic book of Richard Sennett, Together, that explains very well, as even though the human being are social animals, but this gift, this capability can be trained or not, can be reduced. So in some way, if we imagine that we can create conditions, so spaces, infrastructure, and stimuli for having a society that is more creative and capable also, in our case, to move in another direction, but the people have to have something in common. And so we have to work, and we can do something as designer, and I had some example, but I don't show it because I'm late, that help this kind of diffuse knowledge in between the population. And yeah, this is the story. And going back to the beginning, I think that this, modestly, could also be a very small component of a new culture of peace. Thank you.
Now it's time for the panel. I invite Ang Lee, the moderator, and all the panelists to the stage, and Etsy, of course. The panel is about, no, I leave Ang to introduce and moderate the panel.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Ezio, so much for such a timely set of provocations. I feel like we all need to learn how to be proximate again after such a long kind of time away. I almost wish we had some music in the room right now. It seems appropriate after that. But I watched your talk remotely when you gave your last talk at Northeastern in 2020, and it's really wonderful to finally be able to host you here in person at Northeastern, and to have this opportunity to have a longer conversation both about your fascinating new book that you just presented, but also some of the broader themes behind your work around the evolving role of designers as caretakers of our built environments. And so, I also think it's a really nice way to conclude a lot of the discussions that have been happening throughout the week. And so to begin, I just want to briefly introduce myself and our other panelists. So my name is Ang Lee, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Architecture and the College of Arts, Media, and Design. And I have the great pleasure of moderating this conversation today, so I'll try to keep my questions fairly brief so that we can allow time for everyone else. We are also joined by our two panelists, Professors Beth Novak and Dietmar Offenhuber. Beth is the director of the Burns Center for Social Change and Impact at Northeastern, as well as a professor with joint appointments in the departments of Communication Studies, the School of Law, the College of Engineering, and the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. Dietmar is the chair of the Department of Art and Design and holds joint appointments in both the Departments of Art and Design and Public Policy, and is also a member of the Center for Design. I should also say that there are many, many other accolades and affinities in research that I feel like I should list for everyone that's on the stage today, but in order to kind of keep within time, I'm going to keep it short, and hopefully these connections will come out in the conversations. So I think maybe to just open up the conversation, I wanted to begin with a more open-ended question for Ezio and also for our panelists about terminology. And in particular, I think two terms or frameworks that came up and interested me a lot within your lecture, which were on the one hand, this idea of innovation, and then on the other hand, this idea of care. And I think in your call for this more proximate or more kind of relational future, what's interesting to me is that we're not merely looking at a shift in scale from the kind of global to the hyperlocal or the kind of place-based, but you're also talking about this much more fundamental shift in collective value systems between a kind of ethos of innovation, progress, and endless growth that arguably has dominated a lot of design discourse over the past century, and a kind of a narrative of maintenance, care, and repair, whether it's of physical spaces and kind of physical environments, or the care of kind of social infrastructures and relationships. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit more on your perspective on this friction between innovation and care as both the driving forces behind this project, but also maybe more generally behind kind of design discourse and thinking. And in what ways do they rely on or contradict each other? And maybe to add a somewhat controversial question in the context of a research university, is the term innovation outdated?
Mm-hmm. But I answer, or is it better that we give a little bit? So
I think I would love to hear from you, and then I think it's open-ended, so more questions or answers from others.
What do you prefer?
Why don't you start?
I start. Okay. No, I can start, and in some way I think probably you wrote this also before my lecture, because in some way, at least on the side of care, I have already introduced. So let's start from care, that I think this is less controversial, where I have the impression for the way in which you present the story that there are something a little bit more difficult with the word innovation. And if it is so, in any case, you are not the only one. So luckily, we live in a world in which there are different ideas, and there are somebody that criticize all the story about social innovation exactly because they don't like the term innovation. So I don't know if it's your case, but I can try to say why, in my view, it's a term that is good to keep it. In any case, the issue of care, I hope that I said before, where is my reference? My reference is theoretically, there is all this line of people, mainly women, that have dealt with care, and in particular, Puig de la Bella Casa, that wrote a book that for me and for my group has been very relevant. And the link with this discussion is what I said before, that you can organize care by telephone, you can organize the care in big organization, you can organize it in different way, but at a certain point, the relation that is called care asks to be nearby. It's tactile. The Puig de la Bella Casa says, the tactical sense is the one more deeply related to the vision of the radical interconnectedness of our world, because you can see without being seeing, but you cannot touch somebody without being touched. So it's really something that cannot separate one from the other ones. And I like it a lot. And given that one of my hat is somebody that deals with services, even though my way to deal with services is only the collaborative services, but there has been an important book, maybe now 30 years ago, by a gentleman called McKnight, that was talking about the service society as the careless society, a society in which you transform the human relationship in some formal relationships that do not have any more care. So there are many reasons to use care as one of the key issues. In my view, if we talk about the culture and the practices that come from the culture of sustainability, care is maybe the main pillar on which everything has to be rebuilt. Now, why we use, because I'm not alone, we introduce the idea of innovation. And why I think that to be kept? Because innovation has a meaning. The meaning of innovation is when somebody, some agent, change some element in the system that create a new system. A little bit as was in the quote of Simon that has been presented in the last slide of Paolo. So if you do something that generates a change in the system, this is called innovation. And afterward, you have the invention. The invention is not yet innovation. The invention can become innovation. And afterward, the innovation follow a trajectory that moves from the beginning toward the consolidator, the progressive consolidation, until it becomes standard. The bad, in some way, somebody has a problem with innovation because it has been used mainly as a technical innovation, and mainly as a technical innovation inside the market society, inside the consumeristic society. So the innovation is equal to do something new for the sake of making something new. But if we take seriously the fact that we have to move from a system that is mainly going toward the catastrophe, in this case, the environmental catastrophe. There is a competition if we go more catastrophe before the atomic bomb or before we will have the environmental catastrophe or some new virus. In any case, we have a lot of opportunities in terms of catastrophes. So it's going in a certain direction, and if we want to change it, you have to find a new name, but some action that generate some transformation in the system, and this transformation in the system has in some way to spread and consolidate, let's call it Angie Lee. Let's give another name, but you have to name it. Given that the name is innovation, why not? I have the impression that there is one of the role of the intellectual, and we are also intellectual, is if you have a term that has a meaning, and this meaning has been corrupted by bad use, our role is to clean the meaning, not to change the term. It's the same with sustainability. At a certain point, people say, sustainability, we cannot use it anymore because it's used by everybody. Okay, it's used. My role is stupid. Maybe sometimes I'm more hard than that. You are not doing something for sustainability. You are doing something else. Call it as you want, but not sustainability, because sustainability means some radical change. If it is not radical change, it's not sustainability. In any case, what I want to say is that there are some terms that exactly in the moment in which they become successful, they are used and misused. And our role is maybe to reduce the pollution, reduce the semantic pollution. And this is why I think that is a good thing to maintain the term innovation, knowing that innovation is not only the technical innovation, it's also a social innovation. And the one that this wave of innovation that we refer to until now, probably now it will change, but this is another lecture, another moment. The real term should be bottom-up, transformative social innovation towards sustainability, because there are many other innovations that have other characteristics. Afterward, we say, okay, normally in an environment like this, we say social innovation is enough, but it should be bottom-up social innovation, bottom-up transformative social innovation towards sustainability.
I guess I'll jump in next. So I think we have to pick our battles in terms of these semantic fights. And I do agree that innovation is a savable and salvageable term, even from the concerns about market, the overbearing association it has with private markets and social entrepreneurship that it sometimes gets confused with, and the kind of culture of technical optimization that I think you're talking about. But I will tell you that having arrived at Northeastern a few months ago to set up this new Burns Center for Social Change, when I arrived, I was told it will be the Burns Center for Social Change and Innovation. And we are, in fact, not the Burns Center for Social Change and Innovation. So it was a battle that I fought. I didn't have you to advise me at the time. Maybe I would not have made such a fuss. But I asked to remove the word innovation, not for the reasons that you named, but because my concern is that the ethos, the culture, the way that we think about innovation, and again, it's very closely allied with a kind of growing culture around entrepreneurship that universities have invested in over many years, is about the bright, shiny object. It's about the new idea, technical or otherwise. Could be service, could be method, could be other design innovation, but it does not place adequate emphasis on the implementation of change. And so much of what you're talking about, which I think fits in within the broader movement around the politics of care and really creating sustainable solutions to some of our hardest problems with a human face, requires not just the new idea, but the implementation of sometimes very age-old ideas. And so simply because the term innovation doesn't necessarily capture this, frankly, very mundane task of implementing, creating that space that you showed where the people can dance, getting that done, making that happen, creating not just the space, but then also the occasions for this kind of new human connection, is often very, it's often very old ideas and very thankless, the very thankless tasks of actually making those kinds of human connections happen. And so for that reason, I would both agree and disagree. I agree with all the reasons that you laid out, and I do think innovation is a great term, really. But I also think it's very problematical because it shields and denigrates and does not pay enough attention to the very hard task within design of actually making change happen. So let me stop with that just in the interest of time, and we can come back to more about care and pass the mic to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm also very sympathetic to this idea of semantic hygiene, and it's also an example of care and maintenance in a way, because you have to keep the words clean. And then, but I think the other part, what Ang mentioned as a provocation, was also that they are in opposition to each other, and I'm a little bit reminded of the maintenance art manifesto by Mireille Ciuccarelli, and where she's put this kind of avant-garde hero male on the one side who innovates, has ideas, and the maintenance worker female on the other side who keeps things going. And I think that critique as a very stark contrast was very persuasive, because nobody really idolizes, I mean, at least in our context, this kind of avant-garde notion of innovation anymore. So I think what we see, and especially what we saw in the last 2 years of this kind of social innovation was very much focused on this kind of grappling with the situation as it the pandemic, on grappling with the situation as it presents itself, or dealing with the situation. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, in some of my work, I'm dealing a lot with like processes of bricolage and, you know, material discourse, improvisational making of things. You know, this is also a form of innovation that happens in a way of call and response by you know, doing something, someone else reacts to it, changes. It's not always in a spirit of collaboration. Often it's based on very opposite views. But if we take the pandemic as an example, you know, let's say Cambridge closed the streets for cars at the beginning of the pandemic. All the bikes and pedestrian spaces were opened, and then the restaurants started colonizing the sidewalk. So that then completely transformed the city in a certain way. This is not a one hero that is in the background that has this innovative idea, but this is a kind of a process of improvisational governance, because it always then at some point goes too far, where now the restaurant owns the sidewalk, and you know, you can't go with the scooter anymore. Or and we also did this project in Berlin where we documented all those changes in the city through the lockdown, and you know, all the playgrounds were closed, so people built their own playgrounds in the middle of the street using kind of found materials. So I think this kind of notion of social innovation as a process of bricolage that is a kind of a material discourse, I can totally, you know, relate to that.
But the result of this bricolage is that all the initiatives that have been done in the city of proximity are mainly done in the way that you are mentioning. So it's a kind of bricolage, the way in which it happens. And you call it innovation or not?
I mean, I'm fine with the word, you know, I absolutely...
Maybe we can stop this. Maybe it's not so interesting, so we can call it Francesco, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
We can give another name. But something, so that the example that you did could be done better also in my conference if it was a second stage, was exactly to look how it happens. And the social innovation happens because people do something, as you said. So because something, it's not something linear. So maybe when you think the innovation done inside the big company, you can imagine that innovation is linear. It's not linear also in the big company, for what I know. But for sure, the social innovation is not done like this. I can understand, maybe before I said, I feel my role, I am a teacher, I'm a professor, I do things, so I do also some projects, but if there is a term that I find that is correct, I try to defend it. But I am also political enough, so I'm political enough that if it happens that we spend all the time, instead of talking about the real problem, we talk about the terminology, I say, well, maybe it's better to change the name, not to name it. For instance, sometimes when I am in Italy and they ask me what I do, I say, I do projects. I don't use the term design. Because it took me half an hour to explain why, being a designer, I do what I do, that I say, well, in this moment, I say, I do project. You understand what is do project? Yes, this is what I do. And this is a kind of political choice, not to enter in a discussion that for me is really not so important. And so it's a terminology, but
I think but you are right, and I know we want to now get off this, but you are right that reclaiming terms that are powerful, that are understood, that have currency, you know, it can also be incredibly useful. So I love, for example, the term public entrepreneur, simply because, not only because it was coined by Elinor Ostrom in her dissertation in '69, but because everybody knows the term entrepreneurship, and it creates an opportunity to stand it on its head and to say, we're actually focused on the solving of social problems and societal problems, and we have to approach them with a similar mindset but let us tell you all the things that are wrong with how we think about entrepreneurship today. So I do think that the, cleaning the term innovation, there's no one right answer here. I think the point is, and Ang's question is correct, that to engage with this question of what do we miss when we approach something like innovation from a purely market-based or technocratic perspective, and then we miss the bottom-up aspects that you've been talking about.
If I can say one thing, one of the we can call it innovation or not, but from the studies and the theories of innovation, there are a lot of things that have been very useful to observe this phenomenon. Because, for instance, the fact that it goes by waves. As the technical innovation, there have been hundreds of thousands of books talking about the waves of innovation. And also the social innovation goes by waves. So I have not in depth, but what I mentioned as a reference to my story, to our story today, is one wave of social innovation that happened for certain reason in a certain place with certain characteristic, and in my view, is also now arrived not at the end that is not important, but for sure what has happened in the last two years is generating new waves of social innovation. So the idea of waves, the idea that innovation, also the social innovation, in my book I try to explain it, there is this S curve is followed because you have at the beginning the heroes that are the ones that start to do something against everybody, and they have to have an incredible power and capabilities. And afterward, if the idea is good, this can be consolidated. And when it's consolidated, it can take different directions. And some of the direction could be also very bad, and some could be better. And therefore, at a certain point, they can become the new normality. And we can talk about some social innovation. They became positive new standards, new normality. So the fact that if you say only change, social change, you do not have the possibility to see that if we take the most obvious one of the here in the state, the community garden, at the beginning the community garden was done by guerrilla gardeners that had to face the police to plant what they wanted to do. And now, here and in Europe, if there is a group of people that wanted to make a garden in an abandoned lot, the institution normally open all the doors because they are very happy that somebody do it. So we have to have the word to say that the social change, there is a moment in which somebody is starting something against everybody, and afterward there are other capability to consolidate, to make it stable, to give a possibility to last in time, to give some guide. I use the term, I don't know if it's correct, yes, it's institutionalized, because institution in the good sense of the term is what should give some guideline. Avoid that a good idea has to exchange a room, become Airbnb and kills the cities. Or a good idea has to have a carpooling, become Uber and generate the new generation of slaves. So somebody has to put some limits in the way that the evolution of the good idea do not lose the original direction. So this need not only, there is a change. There is something that we can call Francesco, but that have a story that goes from the beginning, change, and at a certain point need some norms, need some rules, need something that transform the good idea, that help the good idea to consolidate in time and maintain what were the original values, if it had original values.
I'm really loving this discussion, and I think the reason I brought it up is I often feel like terms that seem opposite actually end up meaning the same thing, and there's this kind of two sides of the same coin concept. So I love this idea that you bring up of innovation as a form of activism, or Dietmar, the notion of innovation as a form of bricolage, as a way of kind of working in the ruins in some ways. And I love that you bring up the work of Mary Lederman Euclides, because in many ways the Maintenance Manifesto is also an opposition in terms. And that this notion that the old and the new can kind of coexist with the high tech and the low tech within the notion of innovation. And so I have lots of other questions, but Paolo, I know we are tight on time. So I don't know if we want to open this up to the audience or.
Yeah, maybe one question of the audience. Yeah.
Do we have time?
Not really, but
Maybe just one?
there is anyone from the audience?
It's a lot of pressure.
It's just in terms of what you guys were just talking about. I'm interested in bringing in the context of creativity, which Ezio did mention in the talk as well, but it seems like part of what this is centering around in terms of innovation is actually this idea of big C creativity, as opposed, which is the domain-changing kind of creativity, as creative scholars talk about it, right? And then what is the domain-changing ideas? And what that introduces, I think, into this discussion of proximity is what are the kinds of features that not only lead to proximity, but also engender creative engagement. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. So I have ideas, but I'd love to hear any of your ideas.
I'm not sure that I have understood.
Sorry.
Can you, only the core of the question, maybe without the mask? So, okay, thank you.
Sure. Do I need a mic? Sure. Basically just talking about the relationship between the notion of big C creativity in relationship to the notion of innovation and also in relation to the notion of proximity. So if you're thinking about what are the conditions of creativity, not just in relationship, in conjunction with everything you're saying about proximity, but if a creative engagement is sort of crucial for that, I think you talked about that radical shift, that is the sort of definition of a creative moment, right? So what are the elements that will help foster that kind of creative thinking and those kinds of creative moments in the context that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I was mentioning before that when when I say we, means not only the group that was working with in the Polytechnic, there was several people in the world, but I can talk for the one that I know better. For sure, we have been in the first groups that started to use a design approach, the expert design approach to something that was happening in the society. So social innovation as a notion was already existing, especially in an Anglo-Saxon world, in UK mainly. But we started to say in terms of design. And the beginning was exactly to assert creativity, because the definition of creativity, one of the definitions of creativity is to take what you already have, to change the order, and to give it different meaning. Where the technological innovation is basic science applied to change some technology to make it different. The group of people cannot invent a new technology, but can take the technology that already exists and mix it in a different way and to generate something that is new. So this remixing, this reframing the system is the core of creativity. So we name this community as creative communities, because we're communities that instead of continuing as is the tradition is to do as you have always done, maybe a little bit better, polishing it a little bit, but you do as we have always done. When you change some rules, and you change not in an incremental way, but in a way that really, at least locally, is a systemic change. So a systemic change, when it starts, it needs for creativity in the sense of capability to look to the reality, to understand where there are some topic that you want to face, and to see how the things can be reorganized in a different way. This is one of the main definitions of creativity. So by definition, all the story that has to bring us toward sustainability, that will be as a whole a social learning process, a very bricolage-like social learning process, but a learning process. But at the molecular scale, the changes happen because somebody has the capability to look to the things and say, you know what, but instead of being like this, it could be like that. The fact that this could recall something of the past, but it's very important to say that even though people dancing in the street could, that example could be similar to something that happened in the past. In reality, it's totally different, because in the past there was some tradition that said certain days during the year it happened something, so it was totally obvious, where those people are people that reconquire the street and do something that was not obvious to dance in that street. So even though they can have some flavor that come from the past, the possibility to do is exactly the move from repeating the tradition, as it was in the past, and reinventing something that could have some element of the past, but reorganized in the new context in which you have individuals that have to imagine something that was not obvious. For instance, if at that point the streets are mainly something for the car, as has been, if you say, no, the street could be a place where to dance, you are doing something that is not in the tradition, and you have to have the imagination to imagine that the street could be the place where to dance, at least in that case of dancing. So this is the base of the creativity for the, in my word, the diffuse design capability. Afterward, it's another level what we, the expert, can bring in the story. And what we can bring in the story is the creativity that, if you want, this is not the only role that we have, but one of the roles that we have, much more expertise, much more sensitivity, or we are also more accustomed to use our creativity. And this could bring the fact that things can have a certain quality, for instance. So we can, as designer, have a peculiar role in understanding how you can promote some quality in terms of care, but that is also the quality of the space in which you are, the quality of the interface that you are using, the quality of the communication that you are using. So there is the creativity in regenerating the system, and the creativity in introducing this regenerated system some sub-element that have the typical capability that we should have. We invent a way to communicate. We invent a way to organize a space in the fact that could have that kind of value that we see. I don't know if it was an answer to your question, but I leave the floor, happily leave the floor to my colleague.
I'm looking at Paolo to determine whether the floor is still open.
You're on tap already, so I'll let you if you want to add to that or not. But it's technically all.
We can 5 minutes. There are so many Italians here, we can be more elastic. We can give the bed.
You want to go first? Or
Sure. I mean, I'm sometimes a little bit skeptical of the centrality of the idea in creativity. So, for example, I like this example that you brought about urban gardening, where first there are some people that have to overcome a resistance, and then it becomes a kind of a big phenomenon. But those two groups don't necessarily have the same idea or the same mindset. I mean, let's say here in Boston, the urban gardeners, the Chinese immigrants in the 1960s who started growing food in the South End, they wanted to grow food. They probably didn't have this kind of hipster pop-up urbanism in mind. So in a way, creativity may be something that arises out of a situation sometimes. And in this context, I like this kind of three conditions that you outlined. I think this is a useful way of looking at it. But at the same time, it's not something that is necessarily always inside one human mind, but something that is an ecological quality that we can kind of foster.
I'll add something in a slightly different direction that's just coming to mind with the question. Two, three things. One is I'm just thinking about the kind of the notion that we've had so long before COVID, really for the last kind of decade before this, about how proximity really is being used to engender the kind of creativity you're talking about. So you have an organization like UNDP that has said, you know, the largest development budget in the world focused on tackling important societal problems, and has said we're going to reorganize ourselves around the notion of innovation labs, where we build these spaces in 90 different communities for people to come together to engage in the kind of bottom-up bricolage that you're talking about in order to address our most urgent problems. And then we've seen during COVID, of course, how we are rethinking the nature of these spaces as virtual spaces and as networks that aren't so reliant necessarily on proximity, but to create these similar kinds of social innovation processes. But where there is that important element that sort of strikes me as you're talking of the people who understand, the creative class, if you will, who understand the kind of tools in the toolbox. So if using your definition of reassembling existing parts into something new, we have to have some knowledge of those existing parts, of what that lexicon looks like. And so the combination of sort of the people muddling their way through with the professional creatives, if you will, who master the kind of tools in that toolbox and who then together can think about these processes of reassembly that I think are really interesting, and where we're going to see these very interesting kind of hybrid spaces emerging that are both networked and virtual and then physically proximate, to think about how do we create more successful physical spaces and virtual spaces that lead to the kind of caring society and caring environment that you've been talking about. So I don't have an answer to the question. I just really like the question because it stimulates a lot of interesting thinking about what are the kinds of spaces, what are the kinds of creative processes, what are the different motivations that may sometimes be in conflict, but that may begin to engender sort of very interesting results in terms of where we need to go for the sake of our planet and the sake of our survival.
Mm-hmm. There's also something about all of these conversations that's making me think of this concept of broken world thinking by the technology scholar Stephen Jackson, that for me holds these two pieces to it, that on the one hand it's about acknowledging the brokenness of the systems within which we operate, and on the other hand of seeing the creativity within acts of maintenance and bricolage and reassembly and working with existing, which I think is really exciting in the context of your work. And maybe this is a good time for us to segue into more informal conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.